Hello and welcome to the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at IZU at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University. This is our monthly seminar that we have on Islam and international relations. The purpose of this seminar is to invite um, leading experts on the on international relations and on the mandate of our institute. We engage them in a webinar. So usually we have these in person, but because of COVID, nowadays we are doing these online until we can resume activities as normal. Uh, this seminar today is particularly for is a focus seminar on Turkey. Today we're privileged to have uh, Dr. Sener Akturk with us. Dr. Akturk is an associate professor at Koç University in Istanbul. He is a scholar of comparative politics and with a focus on comparative politics of ethnicity, religion, and nationalism. His PhD, which I think it was a PhD that was turned into his first book, is Regimes of Ethnicity and Nationhood in Germany, Russia, and Turkey. He received his PhD from Berkeley, and before that, he was at the University of Chicago. Mr. Dr. Akturk has published widely in a number of articles that are leading articles in the field. There are too many to list. He publishes both in English and in Turkish. And he has received a number of prestigious awards and grants for his research. We are deeply honored and privileged for him to be here with us today. Today, we had agreed that he would present one of his most insightful articles titled Turkey's Grand Strategy as the Third Power, a Realist Proposal. I will turn it over to Professor Akturk and allow him to introduce his article and tell us something about why he wrote it, how he wrote it, and share with us its insights. And then later we will have a question and answer, as we usually do, from all our participants. All those who are listening live from Facebook can ask the questions on the chat feature there. And those who are following us on Zoom and other platforms can also funnel their questions through us, and I will try to relay them to Dr. Akturk as soon as I get them. Professor Akturk, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this generous introduction and for this invitation. Uweys Han and Professor Sami Al-Eryan and the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, this opportunity to present my most recent article on Turkey's grand strategy as the third power, a realist proposal, is very exciting for me, especially for an audience that I think will be very interested and engaged with these questions. But a little bit of background on what motivated me to write this and how this publication came about, because it's part of a special issue of the journal Perceptions, which many of you are familiar with. It is the English language academic journal of Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, published by the Center for Strategic Studies at the ministry. And I was privileged to be the guest editor of this special issue on debating Turkey's grand strategy. So apart from my article, you will find 4 other articles by distinguished colleagues from several of Turkey's other universities in this special issue on Turkish grand strategy, proposing different grand strategies, different analysis and proposals for Turkey in the 21st century in terms of grand strategy. So this is the background, and the motivation, as you see in the introduction and also in the special issue contributions, is that we saw the lack of a debate on Turkey's grand strategy as a major disadvantage. There are many reasons why that has been the case. I try to go over some of them in the introduction. By the way, let me also, I know that quite a few of you have already had access to the article, but the article and all the articles in the special issue are open access in English. This is the page, Perceptions Journal of International Affairs. So you can just Google it or find it, or you can just type the title of my article. You will still find it, Turkey's Strategy as the Third Power, a Realist Proposal. And if you click on the PDF, again, it's open access, the article will appear. So as I discussed there, a major, I mean, I don't like to, nobody does, I don't like to read the entire article, of course, but I'll briefly summarize it using the abstract, and I'll talk about some of the motivations in that summary. The article, in a nutshell, proposes a grand strategy for Turkey that is based on neo-realist assumptions. In a nutshell, while Turkey's immediate neighbors, with the partial exception of Iran, do not pose a conventional existential threat to Turkey in terms of their latent potential or military power, the periphery of Turkey's immediate neighbors, which we might call the neighbors of neighbors, includes half a dozen regional powers that have the military or economic capacity to threaten Turkey's neighbors or Turkey itself. And I go over their list and their power capacities and some examples of recent aggression. Thus, Turkey should adopt a neighborly core doctrine to keep great powers' military forces out of its immediate neighborhood. And if possible, Turkey should seek integration with its immediate neighbors through bilateral or multilateral economic, political, and security initiatives. The urgency of this imperative is underlined by the fact that 4 of Turkey's 8 neighbors, namely Syria, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, have been occupied by the great powers or their proxies since the end of the Cold War. So in a fairly short period of time, actually, in a recent window. Turkey's position has to be that of the third power, as I emphasize in the title of my article, a third power that supports the independence and territorial integrity of the countries in its immediate neighborhood that are being partitioned and destroyed in proxy wars between the two major rival alliances. So the American and Russian-led alliance, both of which are contributing to the partition and occupation of Turkey's immediate neighbors. They have already in the last 2.5 decades. Among Turkey's immediate neighbors, Bulgaria, Georgia, and Syria are critical as Turkey's gateways to the West, East, and South, respectively. Turkey's historically rooted and overwhelmingly amicable ties with more than a dozen countries across Eastern Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia are highlighted in this article for their positive significance for Turkey's grand strategy. Now, the reason there hasn't been much of a debate on Turkey's grand strategy, we didn't have a special issue like this, right, on Turkey's grand strategy until basically 2020, 2021. And in a way, this is surprising. In another way, it isn't, because Turkey was staunchly part of the NATO alliance, and it didn't have, I mean, many would argue that it didn't have a autonomous, independent grand strategy. It simply followed the NATO chain of command, and it didn't have the military, economic, political capacity to have a grand strategy of its own. That would be one argument. And that argument is still voiced by many, and it has been voiced in the public and other kind of preparatory talks and discussions we had, because some scholars argue that a country like Turkey can't have a grand strategy. Right? Some neo-realists argue that only a superpower can have a grand strategy, that is United States. Some of them extend the list to include China and the Russian Federation, you know, the countries that have global military projection capacity. We disagree with that. I mean, the contributors to this special issue, and I can speak personally for myself, because we point out to many studies about French grand strategy, Iranian grand strategy, Israeli grand strategy, Saudi grand strategy. Right? So these are countries that have populations, economies, and militaries that are roughly equal or smaller than Turkey. So if we can talk about an Israeli, Iranian, Saudi, French grand strategy, then there shouldn't be a problem of military economic scale in talking about Turkey's grand strategy. I mean, I don't want to go over all of the criticisms. If we are in this webinar, I think many people agree that there could be a discussion about Turkey's grand strategy. So I'm going to skip over many other criticisms. But what is grand strategy? Grand strategy Grand strategy outlines a hierarchy of national interests or objectives. Hierarchy is very important, the prioritization, proceeding from the primary and secondary to tertiary and lesser interests of the country. And accompanying these primary, secondary, tertiary interests, you need to have an accompanying hierarchy of threats against such national interests and objectives. For example, Wang Yisi, who wrote about China's grand strategy, argued that any country's grand strategy must answer at least 3 questions. What are the nation's core interests? What external forces threaten them? And what can the national leadership do to safeguard them? So that's why I start in the article with a factual overview of military, economic, and demographic, because population is also very important as a latent potential power. Overview of Turkey's neighbors, neighbors of neighbors, and then the globe as a whole. But let me not lose sight of the main argument, and let me state that, and I will keep restating it until the end of the presentation. Turkey occupies a relatively secure geopolitical environment in terms of conventional threats. And this is kind of the first main argument of this article, is that none of Turkey's immediate neighbors have the capacity to challenge Turkey. Yeah. Bulgaria, Greece, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Iraq, Syria. Therefore, this is actually an environment conventionally that many countries would yearn for. But we can't say the same regarding the neighbors of neighbors, Turkey's neighbors of Turkey's neighbors, and we definitely can't say that for the global powers, especially Russia and the United States, but also Iran and France and several other regional European and Asian powers that have directly militarily intervened in Turkey's immediate neighborhood. So one of the first statements of the grand strategy that I have in the article is the following: if a great power, whether that is Russia, United States, or France or China, if a great power permanently occupies or annexes all or a part of the territories of any of Turkey's neighbors, thus becoming the de facto or even de jure immediate neighbor of Turkey, then Turkey's national security will be deeply compromised and threatened. Therefore, the highest priority of Turkish grand strategy should be to prevent the occupation of its neighbors by any of the great powers, including, most importantly, Russia and the United States, among others, because these are also factually the 2 great powers that have had the most number of interventions in Turkey's immediate neighborhood, military interventions. So there are many, and I don't go into that much detail for problems of length, but basically the Turkey's geopolitical environment until 1992 was the opposite, because from 1700 until 1992, Turkey neighbored Russia, Tsarist Russia, Soviet Union, and until 1992. And Soviet Union, as long as it existed, but also Tsarist Russia, especially in 19th century, was a great power. Soviet Union was a superpower. So there was an asymmetric imbalance between Soviet and Turkish capabilities. Turkey had the opposite geopolitical environment, where it was dwarfed by Soviet military economic threat. So the best thing that has happened in the last 350 years for Turkish security environment is, of course, the collapse of the Soviet Union. For the first time in some 300 years, except for a couple of years during Turkish independence war. There was also independent Georgia. For the first time in 300 years, Turkey doesn't share a border with Russia, and it is imperative that this situation continues. So, as I emphasize in the article, the independence, integrity of Georgia is absolutely central for Turkish grand strategy. But we can say the same with many other neighbors, but Georgia is an immediate one because it's the only country that stands between the Russian military and Turkey. But this gives you an idea of the general structure. I briefly draw upon other similar strategies of third power in the 20th century. The French strategy of grandeur under Charles de Gaulle, when France was neither pro-American nor pro-Soviet, but tried to balance the two and kind of carve out autonomy. Iran's third policy, when Iran tried to ally with Germany and alternatives to Britain and Russia and Soviet Union to develop its capacity, and the early years of Israel, when Israel allied with France as opposed to Soviet Union and United States to develop its nuclear power and then nuclear weapons as well. So there are many other cases. I gave just 3 examples that many people would be familiar, I think, because they are very close to Turkey, Iran, Israel, and France also. These are middle-sized countries and even small countries in global comparison that have developed quite a bit of autonomy and military economic capacity, following something like a third power strategy in the 20th century. Parts of the 20th century, not the entire 20th century. So let's briefly look at, because in the interest of time, I want to be able to get to the soft power elements of this strategy as well. Let me share table 1 from the article again with you. Here is table 1, where I look at, and this is not a, I mean, this is a typical way in which I think neorealists approach security environments. They look at GDP and population as potential sources of power. These are latent power that can be converted to actual military power, because military power builds on economic and demographic population capacity. When we look at, in table 1, economic and military balance of power between Turkey and its immediate neighbors, we basically see a very kind of clear, unrivaled kind of leading position of Turkey. It clearly has the largest economy by a long margin, twice larger than the second largest, Iran. It has a population that, again, is more than twice of all of its neighbors, again, with the exception of Iran. That's why both in the abstract and elsewhere, I mentioned Iran as a partial exception, because Iran is comparable to Turkey, but not quite, but it's comparable. When we look at defense budget, again, both Iran and Israel have, Israel is in the next table. Here, just Iran comes close with $13 billion. Turkey is, again, the leading one. But when we look at military strength rankings from 2009, Turkey is the only country in its neighborhood ranked in the top 10 among its neighbors. The second country that comes closest is, again, Iran, which is ranked number 14th. But there is, of course, one difference. 3 of Turkey's neighbors, namely Bulgaria, Armenia, and Iran, have nuclear power. They have nuclear power plants. In the case of Bulgaria and Armenia, from the communist period, but they are still operational. And Iran developed one, as many people know. So that, of course, gives an edge also in terms of potential power. But nonetheless, Turkey is typically ranked as militarily the strongest country in its neighborhood. So this picture, and I don't want to get into too much detail, but this is kind of quantitatively gives the overall picture. Turkey doesn't face an existential conventional threat from its neighbors. I don't think Turkish national security is kind of haunted by the fear of a Bulgarian invasion or a Georgian or Greek occupation. This is just not realistic. Only with the exception of Iran, and even in the case of Iran, it's debatable in a one-on-one conflict whether Iran has any chances of prevailing. So Turkey's neighbors are mostly, again, partial exception of Iran, provide a very relatively secure environment. So what Turkey should do is to preserve this situation. But the threat to this situation comes from great powers, as we'll see. But first, let's look at the neighbors of neighbors. When we turn to the neighbors of neighbors, it's the opposite. Right? When you look at the neighbors of neighbors, countries that are 700 kilometers in the periphery of Turkey, we see a number of nuclear, well, most obviously we see Russia, right? The second largest military power in the world with the largest nuclear arsenal. We see Israel, 17th military power, again with nuclear weapons. Ukraine, much less, but 29th. It's not so it's not nearly comparable to Russia or Israel in terms of its military capacity. But Italy, 11th military power, just below Turkey, again with nuclear power. Egypt, 12th military power with larger population than Turkey. Not larger economy, but larger population, and so on and so forth. And Saudi Arabia with a sizable surplus economically, disposable money, let's say, from oil revenues, a very large economy, usually competing with Turkey in terms of the largest economy in the Islamic world. Some of you may be familiar with debates about Israel's grand strategy, the periphery doctrine of Ben-Gurion, David Ben-Gurion, which has been followed fairly consistently, where Israel seeks to ally with the neighbors of its neighbors, right? The non-Arab neighbors of its neighbors, Ethiopia, Iran, and so on and so forth, Turkey for a very long time, because it sees all of its Arab neighbors as immediate threats. Turkey's security environment is completely the opposite. Its immediate neighbors, none of them, with the partial exception of Iran, are threats. So that gives Turkey the opportunity to actually have regional integration and preserve, which is also morally and diplomatically the right thing to do anyways, to preserve the territorial integrity and independence and autonomy of its neighbors, and to protect them from the neighbors of neighbors, and especially from great power intervention. When we turn to the great power intervention, and I'll try to keep to the 20-minute, sorry, not 20-minute, 45-minute presentation target. Here was a nice summary. While the first ring of immediate neighbors around Turkey have considerably smaller economic and military capabilities, the second ring of regional powers, including Russia, most importantly, that can be described as neighbors of neighbors, include many states with economic or military capabilities that rival or far surpass those of Turkey. So when we look at, and in terms of global great power balance, it's fairly clear. And we look at the top 10 military powers according to the military power index. Turkey is the only one that is in the top 9 without nuclear weapons or nuclear power. It is the one with the smallest economy. So it's in the top 10 military powers, but it is 850 billion dollar GDP. All the other 9 countries that make it to the top 10 in terms of military power have economies that are at least $1.5 trillion, South Korea and Russia, and usually much more than that, going all the way up to $19 trillion in the case of United States, or $12 trillion in the case of China. And their populations usually dwarf that of Turkey, 1.3 billion for China, 1.3 billion for India, more than 300 million for US, and so on and so forth. And their defense budgets very much outstrip that of Turkey. Even the closest ones are more than 2.5 times the defense budget of Turkey. So what this picture tells me is that if any of these great powers make it to Turkey's neighborhood through direct military intervention and occupations, which they have done, especially in the case of United States, but also Russia, then that's going to, and France, that's going to disrupt Turkey's security situation in a very fundamental way. And that's exactly what we actually witnessed. over the last 25, 30 years since the end of the Cold War, but arguably even before that. Turkey's external threats primarily consist of foreign occupation and partition of its immediate neighbors. And here we have 4 case studies, 3 of which are more important because the 4th one was partially resolved during the publication of this article. The one that everybody is very much aware of now is the Russian, Iranian, American, and French joint occupation of Syria, right? The east of Euphrates, primarily by the American military, but also with French auxiliaries, and west of Euphrates by the Iranian army and the Russian Air Force and Navy. So this 4 great power, well, one of them is a regional power, occupation of about 90% of Syria, is of course a concern for Turkey because Russian military, American military, these are and Turkish supported Free Syrian Army was the last one to go in. So people talk about Turkish intervention, but Turkish military went into Syria after Russia and United States Air Force and Iranian military and other Shiite militias that Iran rallied and so on and so forth. So, and I come back to that as well, because that's kind of reasonable strategy when Turkey's immediate neighbors are partitioned and occupied. As a last resort, Turkey also goes into establish a buffer zone for the to keep a safe haven, as it does in northwest Syria now. When we another example that many of us have closely followed when it was happening in 2003 and even earlier in the early 1990s was of course the American and partially now Iranian occupation of Iraq. Which intensified after 2003, and British, not so much now, but of course, Russian occupation of Georgia, which is the most immediate threat because Russia is the second largest great power, and it can become Turkey's immediate neighbor if it fully occupies Georgia, and it came close to that in 2008. And Russian occupation of Abkhazia and South Ossetia is a major concern still. And Russian occupation of Ukraine, I mean, Ukrainian Crimea and Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, are also naval threats with the occupation of Crimea, which has been heavily militarized since 2014. It turned into a military base, basically, something like a large island aircraft carrier, made Russia the naval hegemon in the Black Sea once again, as it used to be before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So in a way, the naval situation in the Black Sea, which we now face here from Rumeli Feneri, right? We are directly facing the Russian, Ukrainian, and Crimean coast. All of a sudden, after 25 years of Turkish primacy in the Black Sea, when Crimea was part of Ukraine, since 2014, Russia became the indisputable hegemon in the Black Sea, with the Black Sea Fleet and the heavy militarization of Crimea with missiles and air force and naval force. So now there's a naval threat, but of course naval threat is much less of a concern than an immediate land border, as would be the case if Russia also occupied all of Georgia or as much of Georgia as to come to the Turkish border. And finally, it was the least priority of these 5. Russian-supported Armenian occupation of Azerbaijan was a 5th example. As you know, in the last couple of months, with Turkish militaries support, Turkey's diplomatic and economic and other and military support, this occupation has been mostly reversed, and a path has been cleared for 1 million Azerbaijanis who were forcibly displaced by the Armenian occupation to go back to their homes. So if I am to restate the main point, the primary goal is to keep great powers militaries out of Turkey's neighborhoods, which is not only in Turkey's objective military interest, but it's also the moral and diplomatically right thing to do. right? So, and this is, again, a very fortunate situation for Turkey, that the moral and diplomatic imperatives very much align with its objective interests. So it's in Turkey's interest for the million Azerbaijani displaced to go back to Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding regions, but it's also the morally right thing to do. It's in Turkey's objective interest for 250,000 or more Crimean Tatars in the diaspora to go back to Crimea, but that's also morally the right thing to do. It's in Turkey's objective interest for 4 million Syrians displaced in Turkey and another couple of millions in Idlib to go back to their original homes, but it's also the moral thing to do. Again, we can multiply the examples. It's in Turkey's objective interest, but also the morally right thing to do for the Palestinian refugees to go back to Palestine, and for Bosniaks to go back to what is now de facto Republika Srpska, 49% of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So in all of these regional conflicts that I just mentioned, 5 or 6 of them, you can say it's fortunate, or maybe it's by design, that the moral imperative and the actual national security imperatives of Turkey are very much aligned, and that's a very nice, of course, very nice situation. In the absence of this, right, because Turkey has not been able to prevent the occupation of Iraq, and Turkey has been unable to prevent the occupation of Syria, and Turkey has been unable to prevent the occupation of much of Georgia and parts of Ukraine and much of 20%, not 20%, but much of Azerbaijan until recently. In the absence of that, as a second best option, Turkey needs to maintain an active forward presence in the neighbors under occupation. And another good example, again, here would be Northwest Syria, right? Having failed to prevent this fourfold occupation by the US, France, Russia, and Iran, Turkey finally, it was the latest power to go in with supporting a Free Syrian Army, established a safe haven in Northwest Syria. Ideally, I mean, this is not the ideal situation. This is the second or third best option. Because the best case scenarios cannot be realized. This is what Turkey can and probably will be compelled to do. I don't want to spend too much time, especially with an audience that is familiar with Turkish domestic affairs, that Turkey's main internal threats consist of domestic terrorism and its external sponsors, and you can read about them in the article. Obviously, American patronage of YPG, SDF, the Kurdish socialist militia in East Syria, and seeming American patronage of the Gülenist FETÖ network have played a central role, as anybody who follows Turkish foreign policy knows, in the last 5 years in turning Turkish foreign policy toward a more autonomous, autonomy-seeking direction. Not to a pro-Russian position. I very much disagree with those who argue that Turkey somehow became aligned with Russian grand strategy. That's absurd. Turkish and Russian strategic imperatives and support are polar opposites in Syria, in Libya, in the Caucasus, in the Balkans, so in Ukraine as well. So in all the 5, 6 hot conflicts and frozen conflicts around, Turkey and Russia are supporting opposite sides. So it's not true that Turkey somehow became aligned with Russian grand strategy, but it is de-aligned or disaligned, let's say, from a very American-centric grand strategy as well. So let me briefly talk about, let me see how much time we have. Where is the, oops, sorry. Let me, can you still, okay, can you still, okay. So I'm going to talk about in the next 9 or 10 minutes, not to exceed the 45 minutes, components of Turkey's soft power. And some people have criticized or this point, both in the presentation and prior to publication, as being potentially inconsistent with a realist grand strategy. What's the point of soft power? The power of attraction, power of, again, moral and normative higher ground in a realist grand strategy. I think soft power should be considered another component of latent power, just like population, just like economic strength. And it has been, we have so many examples of this from Turkish history as well, but from other countries' grand strategies. Turkey's independence war was very much boosted by support by Indian Muslims, for example, right? The Khilafat movement, it's economic and diplomatic and kind of political support in the Indian subcontinent. So that was a soft power that has helped the war of liberation, Milli Mücadele. And we have many other examples of this in many countries' grand strategies. Turkey represents certain things, some of which I'm going to talk about under soft power, just like United States, France, Russia, Israel, Iran, China, India represent some things in terms of this soft power constellation in the world. One of the components of Turkey's soft power, and people, I think, still dismiss this, but it's really the democratic legitimacy and representation, which is quite rare in this environment. Turkey has had competitive multi-party elections, at least since 1908, if not going back all the way to 1876. So you had parliamentary representation from Ishkoder, right, Albania, to Basra, representatives of what would be present-day southern Iraq and Albania, Palestine and Syria, southern Bulgaria, Macedonia, and northern Greece were represented in Meclis-i Mebusan in 1908, in 1912, 1914 election cycles. And there are very few polities in the world that can claim to have had multi-party elections for more than 100 years, as Turkey has. Even more uniquely, as I say in the article, the late Ottoman Empire had a parliamentary representation of a very religiously diverse population, including numerous Orthodox, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim members of the parliament, and even ministers of different religious faiths. You can see here the example that I draw on. When you compare this to the classical examples of parliamentary democracy, the oldest modern democracy, Britain, House of Commons did not have a non-Protestant member of the parliament for roughly 140 years. So it was a sectarian monopoly of Protestants, and even before that, Anglicans. And it did not have a non-Christian for 170 years after the Glorious Revolution, until Lionel Rothschild entered as a member of the House of Commons in his third attempt as a single individual. Right? We have similar stories when it comes to the two other oldest parliamentary representative systems. France and United States did not have their first non-Christian, in both cases Jewish deputies, for many decades after their democratic experiment began. Whereas in the case of the Ottoman Empire, you had Albanians and Arabs, Armenians and Bulgarians, Circassians and Greeks, Jews, Kurds, Laz, Vlach, and many other ethno-religious sectarian groups in the parliament from the beginning until the end, which came quite soon with the end of the First World. Another potential kind of soft power element of Turkey, and I particularly want to emphasize this as we can have a discussion around it, is Turkey's potential to become the missing Muslim majority great power. This is probably the most kind of important puzzle of Muslim geopolitics, is the fact that you don't have a Muslim majority great power. You have Catholic great powers, right? You have France, you have Brazil, you have a Protestant superpower, United States, for that Great Britain. You have an Orthodox superpower, now a great power, Russian Federation. You have China, right? Confucian, you have a Hindu great power with nuclear weapons with 1.2 billion people, India, but you don't have a Muslim great power. Even though Muslims represent, a sizable portion of the world, whether it's 1/5 going to 1/4, doesn't matter so much. It's by far the largest religious group that is not represented in the UN Security Council among its 5 members, or even in the top 8, top 10 economic powers. Now, it has many terrible effects, humanitarian terrible effects. For example, the many genocides that Muslim populations suffered from Bosnia to now Myanmar, Rohingya, Arakanese. Again, mass killings in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere are unaddressed because there is no great power that feels the urge to step in. Same thing, I've published another article on religious, sectarian, and racial exclusion since the Protestant Reformation in the Western world. Now you cannot pass Asian Exclusion Act in the United States or anywhere else because there are major Asian great powers. Right? There's China, there's Japan. Historically, you could, and they did, the racist immigration legislation, the Asian Exclusion Act, and so on and so forth in the 19th century. But the most convincing arguments why you don't have such exclusion, such obvious exclusions of Asian immigration, Hindu immigration, is because now you have Confucian, Asian, Hindu great powers. But you can still have, and you do have Muslim ban, as we experienced under Trump administration, and you can have many other forms of Muslim exclusion and African, Christian or Muslim exclusion, because there is no African great power and there is no Muslim great power. So there is no international actor, if you look at from a pure realist power political terms, there is no great power that can step in and kind of step on the brake against mass persecution of Muslim populations. And Turkey has the largest economy among Muslim majority nation states. It doesn't have the largest population. Indonesia has it. It's not the nuclear Muslim power, that's Pakistan, to a lesser extent Iran, right? It's not the country with the largest surplus of economic resources, that might be Saudi Arabia, but it has several other resources, as I mentioned, a long history of competitive, representative multi-party system, a large industrial and agricultural economy. It has symbolic resources such as being the site of the last major Islamic empire, the Caliphate, and it has, let me go back to the next one. I jumped over, but it also has this power of attraction where it receives both refugees who flee persecution from the East, from Muslim majority countries like Syria, Afghanistan, but also further East, China, Russia, from the Caucasus, right? The persecuted peoples from Russia and China, but it also still receives persecuted people from the West as well. People forget that the largest migrations to Turkey in the 20th century have been from the Balkans, right? Almost entirely Muslim population, Bosniaks, Torbeshi, Pomaks, Turkish-speaking Muslims, Albanians. But even today, Muslims from Western Europe, right, who feel their way of life is restricted and persecuted, let's say in France or in Germany, and who come back, migrate back or migrate for the first time ever to Turkey. So Turkey has this power of attraction for keeping, for having both religious and secular different lifestyles coexisting, despite all the problems or conflicts that also are part of that coexistence. So I know that it's already 45 minutes almost, but let me take a few more minutes to move away from soft power back to, again, hard power and identify several gateways. Bulgaria, Georgia, and Syria are quite central for, should be central for Turkey's grand strategy. I already emphasized the importance of Georgia. I cannot overstate the importance of an independent, sovereign Georgia for Turkish grand strategy. Turkey and Georgia have very good economic, political, military relations anyways, but that's absolutely central because Georgia is the only state that stands in between a great power, a former superpower, and the #1 threat to Ottoman and early Turkish Republic, Tsarist Russia, Soviet Union, and Russian Federation, and Turkey. So it's absolutely central that Georgia remains a robust, sovereign state, ideally in control of all of its territories, but that seems very unlikely now that Abkhazia and South Ossetia seem to be permanently occupied by Russia and supported as independent republics, recognized basically by Russia and not by any other significant powers, but nonetheless. Bulgaria is another country that Turkey has actually very good relations. It's the natural outlet of Turkey into the East and West Balkans and into Europe from Edirne. It has the largest Turkish-speaking and Muslim minority in Eastern Europe with and actually Western Europe too, in all of Europe with excellent parliamentary political representation that has been part of many coalition governments. I'm sure we've written about Bulgarian Muslim representation as well. That, of course, has many problems and conflicts as well, but in a comparative perspective, it's a well-integrated, well-represented, successful Muslim minority, mostly Turkish-speaking. And Turkey and Bulgaria have no outstanding geopolitical disputes of significance. Ideally, so Bulgaria would be the ideal gateway to the West, and through Bulgaria to North Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, and Bosnia-Herzegovina and Montenegro. That's a contiguous territory, ideally also with Greece, of course. And to the east, I already mentioned Georgia being the gateway to Azerbaijan, and through Azerbaijan, through the Caspian Sea to Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Central Asia. And ideally, Syria, historically, and for many reasons, would be the primary gateway to the Middle East, right? From Aleppo down to Damascus and Palestine and to Hijaz and Egypt, as it has been for hundreds of years. Now that pathway seems to be blocked due to the Syrian civil war, and temporarily, the Iraqi Kurdish regional government, which again has very amicable, positive relations with Turkey, is an alternative gateway to a kind of not the Levant, but to Iraq and maybe all the way down to Baghdad and Basra. Let me go directly to the conclusion. We are very close to the end now, but these are not the only. This is just Turkey's immediate neighborhood, but Turkey should build a network of third powers and buffer states from Finland to Qatar, from Algeria to Pakistan, from Ukraine to, we can multiply the examples. All of these countries that have been pressured by the two rival alliances. In the case of the Middle East, those would be, one alliance would be United States, United Arab Emirates, Israel, Saudi Arabia, right? The US, Emirati, Israeli axis, and on the other hand, the Moscow, Tehran, the Russian, Iranian axis, and their proxies, which together have partitioned Syria, partitioned Iraq, and pressured many other Middle Eastern countries and led to their collapse. Turkey should cooperate. So I gave the example of Middle East, but there's the Eastern European corollary to this too, and I'll mention that. And that's why it's important for Turkey to build a network of third powers, Qatar, the Iraqi Kurdistan Regional Government, the Free Syrian Army, and the Free Syria region, maybe some other Middle Eastern countries, be that again, we can talk about some other examples, Libya now, Algeria would be, again, a very good example. Further in South Asia, Pakistan and Turkey have historically and at present really good relations, and that's a powerful kind of example of the third power network. But let's not look at this just in terms of North Africa, Middle East, or South Asia. In Eastern Europe, from Finland and Baltic states, Poland and Ukraine, down to what they call Intermarium, the region between the three seas, the Baltic, Black Sea, and the Adriatic. We have all these countries that have been partitioned, pressured, partially occupied, Moldova, again, Transnistria, Ukraine, Crimea, Donbass, that have been pressured both by the Russian-led and the American-led alliances. Some of them have collapsed as a result of these conflicting pressures. And Turkey's role here would be to develop, not as a lead, Turkey will be just one node of this network, not some sort of superpower hegemon, nothing like that. But with Poland, with Finland, with Ukraine would be a prime example here. Ukraine has been pressured both directly by the Russian and the American-led alliances, and as a result, the country is, you see the current situation. Crimea is almost permanently lost, and Donetsk and Luhansk are in seemingly unending insurgency and civil war. Syria is a closer example. I don't even talk about that anymore, but Ukraine is similar, but we have similar issues with Moldova. We had and still have some similar issues with Azerbaijan, definitely with Georgia, which has also collapsed to a certain extent due to these contradictory pressures from the two alliance structures. So this is all I wanted to say. Building a network of third powers and buffer states from Algeria to Pakistan, from Finland and Poland and Ukraine down to Qatar, would serve both Turkey's objective interests and also many of the moral imperatives and normative imperatives that I mentioned, restoring the territorial integrity and the right of return of refugees in Bosnia, in Palestine, in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, in Ukraine, and many other parts of the world where they have been displaced as a result of the Russian-American conflicts, Russian-American-led conflicts. Yes, I think I can end now. Thank you very much for your patience. It was a somewhat maybe too detailed a summary, but I hope this at least gave us enough material to discuss, debate, ask questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Akturk. You took us through a very insightful walkthrough of your recent article, and you've raised some really good questions, and also the argument that you put forward is something that we need to take seriously. I'll open by asking a couple of clarification questions, and then maybe we can funnel some of the questions that we have from social media. The numbers of the rankings that you have in your article, those are from what period exactly? Are those recent numbers or?
Yes, they are either 2018, if the latest number was 2018, or 2019. The presentations, as I briefly mentioned, this was a workshop that was held on February 2020, almost exactly 1 year ago. So the most recent numbers were numbers from 2019 and in some cases 2018. And of course, coronavirus kind of unsettles these a little bit, but usually the GDP figures, military standing, do not change radically in 1 or 2 years. So
yeah, that was going
we
to
can
be
accept this as the
question, because given the there's been an explosion of military acquisition in our region, especially amongst some of the Gulf states and also some of Turkey's neighbors. I was wondering if that if this military expenditures and expansions that we see uh, have impacted those rankings, or where Turkey lies or not. That was one clarification question. Not taking on the. I mean, I think your argument doesn't depend on it, but just to see if in the recent issues, that's one thing. Another
Would
thing
you
is,
like me to answer? I mean, I would rather
I will
answer
ask
all
you,
of the questions together. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a couple of these clarification questions, then I will turn to the audience's questions. So maybe my questions I'll just group together, and then we can move on. Another question is, so I think one of the key components of your argument assumes a kind of autonomous positioning of Turkey. That means that it should actually work in its own interests. But there's still a lingering what say Cold War baggage that Turkey bears. I mean, for instance, in comparison to someone like Iran, its independence credibilities being aligned into NATO, having not even having the ability to. Not its ability to procure weapons and other kinds of high grade military, to do military contracts on its own. For instance, the recent Pakistan deal comes to mind, that it was blocked by the US. Also, like the Russian acquisition question that was raised, it still seems like Turkey isn't able to assert or even show itself as being independent in order to have a kind of grand strategy of a third kind. What would you say about how would Turkey move into a more autonomous, more independent position? Another thing that I want to say just for myself, and maybe you can answer this over the course of your thing. After I read your article, I felt like your article was a kind of critique of Turkish foreign policy or even military strategy since its founding. I mean, because I look past historically and the way Turkey has behaved in the region, and it almost is. If I read your article, it seems like Turkey has, from the very beginning of its foundation, been working against its own interests. I mean, if we take the interest to be that Turkey should prevent intervention in its own region, and that comes all the way up into Professor Davutoglu's tenure. So, for instance, I mean, the intervention in Syria, I know you say that it's a late intervention compared to others, but from what I remember, it was quite enthusiastic in calling for, I mean, the whole red line, when Erdogan went to, President Erdogan went to Barack Obama, and he had actually, seeked American intervention in toppling Bashar al-Assad. I mean, that was a huge episode. That doesn't seem to be a leadership that is trying to prevent foreign intervention, but rather is bringing on, the whole Friends of Syria group, which was created in conjunction with the West in order to, topple Bashar al-Assad. I mean, my question is, that means that all the way up until the Davutoglu's tenure, it seems like Turkey has been constantly, working against its own interests. So it's not so much a critique. I mean, you can bite the bullet and say something like, yes, that's the case, or maybe I'm misinterpreting, all the way up until this period, how I'm projecting your article on the rest of, in the history of Turkish foreign policy. So let's start there, and then there's a bunch of questions that have come in from participants. I don't want to hog the time.
Sure. So I'll briefly answer your questions, and then we'll move to the audience questions. So let me go in the order that you asked them. So military acquisitions, whether they could upset this balance, I'm not sure, because the Saudi and Emirati, for example, have been big buyers of military hardware for many years, and yet that did not at least in the last 5-10 years, that did not seriously upset the military balance. We saw that, for example, the Emirati, let's say, position in Libya seems to have foundered. We can give some other examples. It could, I mean, I can't know the future, right? I mean, it could, but so far it hasn't. As for autonomy and NATO question, the example that I always give, and on purpose, is France. The position that I'm advocating for Turkey is not disengagement or disconnection from NATO, but it's similar to the position of France under, not Sarkozy, of course, but de Gaulle. Right? I mean, this is a country that was part of the Western Alliance because of its security and other concerns. But French foreign policy, and I'm obviously very critical of French genocidal warfare in Algeria and Indochina elsewhere, but it wasn't following the NATO line. Right? I mean, France had its own imperial and other interests. It was within NATO, but it had a different relationship with the Soviet Union, and it carved out an autonomy within for itself within NATO. That's a very different position than, say, the position of Denmark or Greece within NATO, or Italy within NATO. So I think, so what I'm saying here is that Turkey could become as autonomous as France while remaining within NATO, if, of course, NATO doesn't directly contradict these primary interests of Turkey. I think you kind of misunderstood, but understandably misunderstood. I wouldn't criticize Turkish foreign policy until the collapse of the Soviet Union, because there was a very solid foundation of Turkey's strong alignment with NATO and the Western Alliance until 1992. There was no chance, almost no chance, that, the military, economic, and demographic balance between Soviet Union and Turkey was extremely asymmetric. Yeah. So, and let's not retrospectively look at it. Let's look at it in 1945, 50, 60. When Turkish population was a fraction of what it is today, and its economic and military capabilities were far smaller. Right? This is a country that gained its independence by defeating Greece and, some French forces in the East, but this is not, Turkey in 1925, 35, 45 is nothing like a great power. It's a middle to small sized power. So the only way it could preserve itself from a Soviet takeover, as it happened in the Caucasus, as it happened in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Poland, and elsewhere, was seeking the Western nuclear and shield. But I would criticize it after 1992, and in fact, the cracks in the Turkish NATO alliance began not with Justice and Development Party. They began in 1992. They immediately began at that time, and many people have seen it. I think it was the US ambassador to Turkey at the time who said the threat of the last 300 years has disappeared. And now Turkey is seeking a more independent, military infrastructure, more independent foreign policy in Central Asia and elsewhere. So since the 1990s, we have had these debates about Eurasianism, what kind of new relationship to establish with Russia, because it's no longer the primary threat. And in fact, the Iraq war, which I remember very vividly, is a complete reversal. Why? Because you no longer have Russian military. Russian military is north of the Caucasus, but you have a gigantic American military in Baghdad. So you have the complete reversal of the Cold War scenario. Turkey used to border Russia and fear Russia and seek American protection. All of a sudden, Russia was no longer a neighbor, no longer threatening, but American military was piled up in Baghdad and, preparing to go into Syria and Iraq. And all of a sudden, United States military became Turkey's immediate neighbor, and in the eyes of many policymakers, a threat. You read the open public debates. When Turkey's General Secretary of the Turkish National Security Council, I've written about this already at that time in 2002, 2004, said that Turkey should abandon European Union, ally with Russia and Iran. This was the General Secretary of Turkish National Council said in March 2002, in the run-up to the Iraq war, that Turkey should ally with Russia and Iran against the West, because the threat perceptions were so much reversed at the time. Now I think we are somewhere in the middle, because it's no longer 2002, but it's also not 1992. So we are somewhere in the middle, and that's exactly where the current, grand strategic calculation should go back to neither, a fully pro-American or a pro-Russian alignment. For example, if I did not pay attention to the military-economic balance and just, advocate this position throughout Cold War, that would amount to advocating the League of the Non-Aligned, right? Get out of NATO, join Yugoslavia and Sukarno, Indonesia, India, Egypt, Nasser, and become a third. And there were many advocates of that in Turkey's left, Baathists. I mean, there were many Turkish Baathists, so to say, Yön and, Kemalist socialists. They basically advocated a Turkish Baathism of a third world sky. I don't think that would be appropriate for 1960s and 70s, because Turkey bordered Soviet Union. But today, today, again, I'm not saying it's a third worldism or Baathism, but this kind of third power strategy makes more sense. I think from your, in the interest of time, I'll jump over, but I think I have a very different opinion on Syria. I think it was, I still think it's morally imperative that Turkey supports the Syrian opposition. I think without the foreign intervention of the Russian Air Force and the Iranian army, the Damascus regime couldn't stand another year. This was very obvious. Turkey was the last country to go into to shelter, a very small territory, overcrowded with millions of people who can't bear to live under the Assad regime. So I think there was no chance. Turkey didn't advocate regime change or overthrow in the absence of any mass protests. When Turkey intervened and asked for a multilateral intervention for the removal of the Assad regime, that was already after massacres have begun. So Turkey doesn't, so in that sense, again, this could be an entire session, but I think if all the foreign auxiliaries, let's say, if the Russian Air Force and the Iranian army and the American and the French forces and Turkey withdraw from Syria, the opposition would win. And that's exactly why in September 2015, the Russian Air Force went in, because the opposition was winning. That's why the Iranian army and tens of thousands of Shiite volunteers that they rallied went into Syria, because what I see from so much Russian and Iranian support for the regime is that in the absence of such foreign support, the regime cannot count on its own population to stay in power. I think sooner or later it will collapse. But again, I don't want to turn the discussion into a full Syria debate. It's only one part of a big puzzle.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akturk. I'm going to ask you to.
Sure.
I'm gonna turn the comments over to Dr. Sami in the interest of time, and then we'll continue with the questions from the audience. Dr. Sami.
Yes, thank you very much, Weiss, and thank you, Dr. Akturk, for a most interesting lecture in the spirit of the realist. And I agree with your analysis about Turkey's grand strategy for the foreseeable future. I do have some points that I would like to bring into the discussion and also hear your comments about. First, very quick thing. When you discuss third power, I want to know what exactly you mean by third power. Do you consider the US as first and Russia as second, this is third, or do you have a different meaning, deeper meaning than this? But let me tell you my theory, which I have been sharing with many Turkish officials, and they don't acknowledge it. even though I deeply believe in it, and I want to hear your comment about it, because I understand completely US foreign policy and their strategic imperatives, in which one of the major strategic imperatives that the US has is not to allow any growing power and to become a regional hegemon. And after you presented your analysis about Turkey's neighbors, all of them are much weaker, and with the exception of Iran, but Iran is a special case, as you had mentioned. But all of them were not going to challenge Turkey, and Turkey has the ability now, after it has been freed after the end of the Cold War, from actually trying to, not essentially becoming, but trying to become a regional hegemon. And therefore, the US policy is that since they cannot strengthen or build alliances where they can check Turkey's power, the best way to undermine this is by empowering a minority, in this case happened to be the Kurdish population, but particularly when you have about 20% of Turkey's population is Turkey, and you have a powerful military insurrection in terms of PKK. So this is why they have this North Syria policy. It is basically has nothing to do with ISIS, has nothing to do with any larger issue other than try to check Turkey's power, and particularly if they can, to build a buffer between Turkey and Arab states. It will also threaten the internal cohesion of Turkey. It might even break it up because of that large population, and so on and so forth. So this is my theory about what's happening. There is no way that an American Secretary of Defense will resign over simply a small policy difference with Trump. This was a major one. And of course, Trump did it for his own reasons. Trump is not strategic. He did it because he had a deal, I believe, with the president of Turkey, but that's a different issue. The second point is when you talk about grand strategy, I was surprised that you didn't advocate for Turkey to become a nuclear power, because there is no way Turkey could actually project power in the region while it is surrounded by nuclear powers. And here I mean also that, yes, it has NATO coverage, but that could go. At any moment, Turkey really grows out of the role that it has been designed for it. And therefore, a nuclear power doesn't come overnight, and it doesn't come by the help of others. You really have to build it internally over decades. And so I thought that this would be one of your imperatives also, to call for this. Whether it happens or not, that's a political decision. The third point is population. As you had pointed out also, as you have pointed out correctly, is that one of the main elements of power is not just military economy, but also population. I'm sure you've written about this. And Turkey's, by all means, population is limited. And its natural growth really is its neighbors. I'm talking about Muslim neighbors, particularly Syria, Iraq, and the larger Middle East, let's be frank. So I thought also that part of maybe long-term strategy for Turkey, which has been certainly not accepted by many, let's say, Western-oriented people, maybe Kemalists, maybe other forces within Turkey, is that, and this is probably where the overturn has taken place for the past 10, 15 years, whether that continues or not remains to be seen. But I thought that when you augment this this element with the thing about nation state, so you called for buffer states, and buffer states, of course, in a realist terminology and realist understanding is understandable. You're trying to have a buffer between you and a greater power, so to give yourself. That's exactly what Russia is doing in the Ukraine. It's creating a buffer state between it and NATO, and that's very understood by realists. But in our case, I don't think you should be calling for buffer states. You should be calling for a different kind of relationship, because if I tell you, for instance, is it better for Turkey to have the Turkey or the Ottoman Empire under, let's say, Suleiman the Magnificent, where you're bordering all these superpowers of their era, or is it better to have buffer states and go back to 1/15 of what Turkey is today? Instead of 15 million kilometers, we're 783,000. So is there any way also that in the long-term grand strategy for Turkey to establish more or less an integrated environment instead of buffer states, where these countries could also be integrated in this larger vision of having a region. I wouldn't call it an Ottoman or empire by any by any means, but maybe along the like European Union, maybe a different kind of union. You hinted at that, but it wasn't explicit. And this is, again, this is the, I'm trying to understand your thinking, because I'm sure nationalism is a very strong strand here in Turkey. And my question to you, do you think this is even contemplated? Is it possible, of what you know about Turkey's internal situation, that eventually the overwhelming, or let's say a large segment of the Turkish population would accept some sort of an integration with these populations? Or is nationalism so strong that this is out of the, it will never be contemplated? The next thing, very quickly, because I know time is running here, is the issue of Russia. You mentioned also in your presentation, as well as in your paper, about, Russia has been the historical enemy, or the historical, let's say, nemesis. Now we're seeing the reversal of that, because they think they have a common possibly threat. But how deep is that, particularly after the S-400? I mean, this is a strategic relationship. This is not something that over a couple of years. So there must be something within the Turkish decision maker that made them think that this is a long-term strategic relationship. You don't buy this kind of weapons with billions of dollars behind it and going against NATO and its way of acquiring arms sales. I mean, there's something beyond just a seasonal alliance. And I find that most Turkish strategists reject this argument. They say that this just happened to be the case, that Russia is still the external enemy. I want to hear your thoughts about that. Two more points very quickly. Israel and Palestine. I find it very difficult for the Turkish foreign policy that they have accepted, because it's much easier, obviously, for them, the existence of Israel. They call for two-state solution. They don't go beyond their historical role, that my grandfather was an Ottoman. He was living in Palestine. And they wash their hands of, the 1948, and the best they can do is hide behind this two-state solution. Is that a genuine policy? Or is that something that you think might change in the future? And finally, do you think Turkey is trying to get to be a regional hegemon, or is there a different kind of strategic objective? Again, thank you very much for a fascinating discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Samuel Arian. I counted 7, debatably 8 questions, comments, so I'll have to go very quickly in the order that you asked them and try to answer, because I won't be able to probably give a satisfactory answer to all of them, but I'll do my best. The easiest one is the first one, third power. I kept that title, even though I understood that it actually leads to the misunderstanding that Turkey is like the third power after US and Russia. That's not what I mean. It's basically a third alliance, basically, right? It's the third power between power group A, let's say US alliance, power group B, the Russian, Iranian, it might be Chinese in a different context alliance. And I see that group A and group B's competition led to a lot of disadvantages to many Eastern European, Balkan, Caucasian, and Middle Eastern countries. So Turkey's position should be that of a third power. So instead of if I said A, maybe it would be better, but I decided to keep the ambiguity there and keep it as but the spirit is just a third power. There are many third powers. So Pakistan can be a third power. It has a big potential of a third power. Poland, Ukraine can be a third power. Qatar in its own way in the Gulf is a third power between two blocks. So that's what I mean. Turkey as a leading third power, but one of many similar third powers in the world system. Brazil can be a third power, right? I mean, and it attempted something like this at the time. Yes, I mean, preventing a regional hegemon is any global power's first imperative from a realist point of view. For US to remain the regional hegemon in the Western Hemisphere, ideally in all of the Americas, but at least in North America and the Caribbean basin, where there is going to be absolutely no competition tolerated by Soviets in Cuba or Chinese anywhere, but prevent any other regional hegemon, any other part of the world. And I think from a US point of view, actually, Middle East shouldn't be that complicated because there are multiple, there's Iran and Turkey, and there's the Saudi, and there's Israel and Egypt. If these countries are set against each other, they will prevent any of them from becoming a regional hegemon. So in that sense, it shouldn't. I mean, so it's not from a US point of view, I mean, the regional hegemon risk in the Middle East is low. But as you pointed out, many of the, especially Levantine Arab countries have been devastated through these wars in the last 20, 25 years, especially Iraq and Syria, but also many others. Egypt is debilitated due to domestic other issues and so on and so forth. Does that make Turkey an obvious potential regional hegemon? Theoretically, but not practically. I mean, because I really don't want to overestimate how much, actual material or kind of soft power Turkey has, let's say in Jordan and Cairo and in Hijaz and elsewhere. I'm not sure about that. I think, for example, I always think the Iranian threat is exaggerated in the Western media because any strategist would actually know that Iran is self-limited because of official 12-hour Shiism and kind of weaponization of basically a sectarian minority identity. It will never become the regional hegemon that, let's say, a potential Egypt or Turkey could aspire to be. So in that sense, I think, for example, Iranian threat is always and maybe deliberately exaggerated because it's not really, I mean, I'm not saying let's not criticize Iranian foreign policy. I think nobody should get that message from what I already said about Syria. But in terms of this realist calculus of power, it's not a potential regional hegemon. But I'll get back to this question because it's also your last question. It's very much relates to the Turkish nationalism versus regional integration question, which is number 5. The third one, the North Syria policy, the Kurdish socialist project, right? The Saudi-funded, US Air Force supported socialist state in the Euphrates. It sounds extremely contradictory, right? You have Saudis funneling hundreds of billions of dollars to support a socialist Kurdish state with US Air Force bombing Raqqa to open it up for this project. But the struggle over Kurdish identity is very central to the struggle over the Middle East because there are multiple Kurdish projects. There is the Kurdistan Regional Government, an ally of Turkey, especially the Erbil government. There's Turkey's Kurdish opening and this kind of Islamic Kurdish identity that has been, revived and sponsored and supported with Kurdish language TV and education in Turkey. And then there is, even within Iraq, a different, rival Kurdish project. And another, of course, Kurds of Iran. Not very much a project, but so you have the Kurdish socialist project, let's say the Barzani-led model in Iraq. There is the Turkish model. So within this competition, it makes perfect sense for the United States and France, especially, to support the Kurdish socialist, ultra-secularist kind of model. And for the reasons that you mentioned, I mean, to break the point of contact between the Arab world and the Turkish-speaking world, to create a state that is built on fighting all of its neighbors, both the religious conservative majority Kurds, which they have displaced, and Arabs, and Turkmens and others in Syria, in northeast Syria, and a state that will be dependent on foreign patronage. I mean, So this state, in order to survive, will need American or French or Israeli support in perpetuity, forever. So for all of these reasons, I think it does make sense to prevent the emergence of regional hegemony or regional integration. Nuclear power is, I think, because I'm not an expert, it's a complicated issue, I see, because there is a huge cost associated with trying to get it and getting it. There are a few examples: Pakistan, Israel, India, maybe South Africa, that broke out, and Iran to a lesser extent, because it hasn't developed as much. And what use it actually has is, again, debatable, because all the wars that we know so far, even wars that involved nuclear powers, apart from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, involved conventional warfare. What decides the outcome in the battlefield is still conventional wars, the drones and the air force and so on and so forth. So what is the cost of? I entirely understand your point. Nuclear power would be a potential and absolute deterrent to, for example, occupation. And I think that's why the countries that try to get it. And from a realist point of view, actually, most countries should try to get it. And in fact, I'll give you one other anecdote, which is very relevant. The Ukrainian story of the last 7-8 years has been a strong signal for the countries around the world to get nuclear weapons. Why? Because Ukraine was the second largest nuclear country within the Soviet Union. It surrendered all of its nuclear weapons to the Russian Federation because Britain, United States, and Russia guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity and its borders in what is known as the Budapest Memorandum. Mm-hmm. But what happened 20 years later is that the same country that guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity in return for surrendering its nuclear weapons, that is Russia, actually occupied some of the most coveted regions of Ukraine. So any country that observed the Ukrainian story would say, okay, then, obviously Ukraine did a terrible mistake by surrendering its nuclear weapons in 1992. If it didn't, it could keep Crimea, it could keep Donetsk, it could keep Luhansk, it could keep its country together. So I do anticipate that the developments of the last 7-8 years, the Ukraine crisis and others, will actually will motivate nuclear proliferation. And not only that, but also the shift from unipolar world order to multipolar world order. And that's not my thesis, that's the thesis of several other people I cite. The shift to the multipolar world order will increase the opportunity for nuclear proliferation, so nuclear weapons will increase. As for population, you are absolutely right. Population is a huge limiting factor. I mean, for Turkey will remain permanently a middle power. It's not it's not a United States, it's not an Indonesia, it's not Pakistan or Bangladesh, it's limited. The way to overcome this, if we think of it as a limitation, is, as you've said, is regional integration. I don't think that's why I wouldn't use the word regional hegemony, but in the abstract, I read it and then I didn't get back to it. I do advocate a regional integration. I mean, it would be absolutely beneficial to Turkey, but also to Georgia and Azerbaijan, and if there is a resolution to the conflict, to Armenia, but also to Bulgaria, to a reconstructed Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, and Israel, Palestine, with a resolution to the Kurdish regional government, if Turkey and these regions integrate. Now, one big issue, as you mentioned, is the role of nationalism. Would Turks or any of the smaller populations agree to be part of a union where Arabs are majority, for example, right? Which is almost naturally what's going to happen. And a good test case that we are living in the last 6-7 years is the very different attitudes towards Syrian Arab refugees, 3-4 million in Turkey, to the Arab population in general, to the Egyptian opposition and others, more intellectual elite members of the Arab intelligentsia, but also the largest group being the Syrian refugees. You clearly see, unlike in Europe, a bifurcation in public opinion. There's a more Turkic nationalist, ethnic Turkish nationalist opinion that says deportation, Syrians should go back. But there is a kind of what I described in fact, the SIGA conference as well. I presented my article on Islamic multiculturalism and Muslim nationalism in Turkey. There's clearly an Islamic multiculturalism that has been kind of the unofficial policy of the Justice and Development Party since the beginning, with the, legalizing Kurdish broadcasting and TRT Arabic and Arabic language education and so on and so forth. There's another opinion about nationhood in Turkey, which basically says this is a secularized version of a Islamic, or even more broadly, including, Greeks and Armenians and other Orthodox and Christian and Jewish populations, and an Ottoman kind of multilingual, multi-religious community. This second opinion that sees Turkey as a multilingual, multi-ethnic, potentially multi-religious community is very much amenable to regional integration. But it has many critiques. I mean, especially in times of economic crisis, there's a big, ethnic Turkish nationalist upsurge, which basically says, we don't want Kurdish, we don't want Arabic, we just want modern standard Turkish and kind of a more Western European type of secular nationalism. But in Turkish history, you always had a struggle between these two. And I think the fact that there is a struggle means that there's an opportunity for regional integration. Mm-hmm. Again, the test case is and will be what will happen with both Syrians in Turkey and the Free Syrian region in Syria, because that would be a stepping stone for, that could be the beginning of a larger regional integration. But I agree that the only way it would be a European Union, and I definitely think that should be in the Western Balkans, right? Many Balkan countries that have been rebuffed for EU membership, even though they are, fine countries. Whether it's Albania or North Macedonia or Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina, right? I mean, this regional integration can go. Russia has been the arch rival. Your second to last question. That's true. I think Russian strategists still think Turkey as a potential threat. I think for Russia, the imperative is just to break up the NATO alliance, and I think that's why they support Brexit, and they support Turkey following a more Finland type of, neutral position, because they do fear encirclement. They do fear Russian economy hasn't been growing for many years now. The sanctions did hurt the Russian economy. Russia is a big Kuwait. I mean, it's a natural resource-based country. The entire Russian economy and military, they depend on the price of oil. So if the price of oil drops, Russia will face domestic unrest. It will probably have to withdraw, disengage from its foreign military adventures. So when you have a monocrop type of economy like this, just reliant on oil, basically, you have all of these risks. I don't think I didn't read Sergei Shoigu, the Russian Minister of Defense, apparently gave an interview today or yesterday to a Kazakh interviewer and talked about Turan and Turkic world as maybe a potential threat and so on and so forth. I think that's always there. I mean, and Russia's primary ally in the Middle East is not Turkey. I mean, it's Iran to a certain extent. There are other client states. So this idea of Turkey as a 300-year-old British, American, German ally against Russia is not going to go away. And there is, geopolitical reason for that. Israel-Palestine issue, I mean, it's one step further than, Turkey's neighbors of neighbors. It's definitely, a very intractable issue. Turkey, as you said, supports basically. I'll tell you what I think is different with Turkey's position. Again, I'm definitely not, and so just like the nuclear weapons question, I'll say the disclaimer that my knowledge is limited. But Turkey's official position, as you said, is 1967. right? Withdraw to the 1967, have independent Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital, and West Bank and Gaza, just 28% of mandate Palestine as an independent. Sorry? 22, sorry. Yes, I've exaggerated. Only 22% of mandate Palestine as an independent state that is actually, separated into two pieces. But interesting enough, Turkey has taken, and this is the opinion of the overwhelming majority of United Nations General Assembly, right? But unlike many countries that just pay lip service to the 1967 solution, Turkey has been more genuine or outspoken in, saying East Jerusalem has to be still the Palestinian capital and so on and so forth. So it's definitely, Turkey is definitely not taking some sort of a maximalist Palestinian position. I don't think so. It's depicted as such, but it isn't. I mean, it isn't saying, split mandate Palestine 50-50 or something more than that. It's Turkey is just supporting the official position that many countries allegedly are supporting, but it's more genuinely, I think, supporting that position. But is that position tenable in the sense of, is there you look at the map of the illegal settlements in the West Bank and how the two populations are through military occupation so enmeshed. Are we going to an inevitable one-state solution that is, one big state that is half Jewish, half Arab? I don't know. So I know that there's a huge debate whether two-state solution is still tenable or what you can only have is basically one integrated state. And I don't think there's a clear, I really don't know. I can't speak about the Turkish state's official position, but I don't know if there is anything beyond the 1967 border solution that is being kind of advocated. But it's definitely, and your last question was going back to the regional hegemony, but I think I've already said as much as I could on the regional hegemony question. I don't think Turkey should seek regional hegemony because it's going to trigger a huge counter balancing coalition, right? That's why realists always say, don't be an expansionist, because you are going to, and in the case of Turkey, even when it's not expansionist, it triggers such a kind of paranoia and such a countervailing alliance that it really, in the case of Turkey, it really would go against its interest to act like a regional hegemon, but it wouldn't go against its interest if it sought regional integration with Georgia, with Azerbaijan, with Kurdish regional government, Iraq, Syria, or Macedonia and Albania. So regional integration rather than regional hegemony would be the way out of this conundrum. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're well over time at this point. I think that unfortunately we will not be able to get to the questions that were posed by the audience. We're almost 10 minutes over. Maybe I could ask you for some closing comments. I will just mention a couple of I'll throw some things out there that were in the questions, and you can include them in your closing comments or not. Number one is there seems to be an imbalance between the soft power and hard power. So the soft power demands this democratic aspirations, and that almost requires, that almost means that Turkey has to support a position that would be at least threatening to its neighbors, some of them, especially in the Middle East. Number two is that on the soft power issue also, how can Turkey be a Muslim power when it barely has Islam in its own state formation as an ideology? People are still, I think yesterday they were debating over the headscarf, which is so elementary. So Turks are nowhere near being representative of Muslims. It seems like there's a lot of ideological, what can I say? It seems like Turkey is in a very ideologically retarded position when it comes to Islam and Muslims. It needs a lot more development here for it to take that position. Third is the issue is another issue that was raised was, is there any opportunity 2023? I think the person asked that, given that the international treaties between Turkey and the West may come to an end with 2023, is there any rapprochement with Russia that may open up due to that? These are the kinds of things that were put forward. Another thing that was put forward was, you in your paper, you didn't talk too much about Turkey and Egypt. I mean, which is a historical access in our region. Istanbul and Cairo are a historical. The road that goes between there is a very important alliance, but you don't really talk about Egypt that much. Maybe you can explain about that. So, closing comments. You can pick and choose what you wish. I wish we had more time. Maybe we need from you longer. So go ahead, and then I will.
Thank you. So I'll do my best. I'll skip the 2023 question. I don't think I don't believe in these secret treaties that will expire in 2023. I didn't see any evidence of that. The other four questions I'll briefly mention. I'll mention the last question first. I think July 2013 was absolutely the turning point, not September 2015 when the Russian Air Force went into Syria, but July 2013 when the Egyptian military coup overthrew the Morsi government in Egypt was the turning point for the Arab Spring, for Turkey and Middle East, and much else, for much of the greater Middle East history. In fact, if the democratically elected government, whether it's the Morsi government or some other democratically elected, popularly legitimated government, remained in power in Egypt, in fact, as you've just suggested and as historically been the case, a Turkish-Egyptian axis could be the democratizing axis, like a Franco-German axis and many others in the European Union integration process. It could be the kind of democratic Muslim majority states that could kind of that could be the engine of Middle Eastern democratization and integration. Too bad that it didn't happen. A terrible turning point, July 2013. I can't comment on, I mean, I have other questions, but I think it's that was an important one. Imbalance between soft power and hard power, whether it's threatening to its neighbors. It's a good question. I'm unsure. I mean, I understand. I can read many things into it, what the questioner actually means by imbalance. If by imbalance we mean the country having a much larger ambitions than its material capabilities, for example, this has been a systemic problem of Turkish foreign policy. There was the rhetoric of from the Adriatic Sea to the Great Wall of China in 1992, pan-Turkic visions, but Turkish material capabilities were nowhere near there. In the beginning of the Arab Spring, there was there were some visions about Turkey leading kind of all the Middle Eastern and North African countries that were blown out of proportion and that were disproportionate with Turkey's material capabilities. If that's what the questionnaire means, I agree. Whether it's threatening, Turkey didn't and doesn't. Turkey has very good relations with many autocratic Muslim majority nation states. When it takes a side, on the side of regime change, it almost always happens after an actual rebellion takes place and massacres began. And that, of course, creates a huge dilemma. Do you still, I mean, for example, that was the Gaddafi dilemma. Do you still stand by Gaddafi when you have these uprisings? Or do you side with the revolutionary forces? Similar with Syria, but it was less of a, I mean, it was quickly decided that Turkey sides with the revolutionary groups there, but this could happen with any country and Turkey's relations in the Muslim majority or, non-Muslim majority world. The second to last question, how can Turkey be a Muslim power? The Turkeys, and I've written a comparative paper, I'd be happy to share it with any of the participants if they email me, comparing Turkish, Pakistani, and Algerian nation building, which followed a very similar trajectory. These are the three Muslim majority nation states that have been established by the largest popular mobilizations in the Muslim world. The Pakistan movement, Algerian War of Independence, and the one that was the first, the Turkish Independence War, and both the Indian Muslims and the Algerians closely followed the Turkish independence, what became the Turkish Independence War. And in all three cases, a Muslim mobilization for independence was followed by secular nation building with a single official language, Turkish, Urdu, and Arabic. And it led to, Islamic and Kurdish, Berber, Baluch, Bengali backlash since the founding of Turkey, Pakistan, and Algeria. But how I conclude that article is that Turkey has been the most successful of the three because of democratization. It has relaxed and eventually lifted many of the prohibitions on Islamic religious expression and Kurdish and Arabic and other minority languages. So you are right that there are still problems about, both the expression of Islamic religiosity and, Kurdish, Arabic, and other, non-Turkish languages and cultures. But the fact that there is a dynamic struggle and, with every democratization, in a way, the screw is a little bit more loosened to allow for more public acceptance of religiosity and also different languages and cultures is promising, I think. And when you look from the East and South, Turkey looks different, but when you look from the Balkans, or, if you look from the point of view of Caucasian Muslims, the Russia's Muslims, Bosniaks, Albanians, Turkey looks very different, right? Turkey looks actually very religious. When you look from Eastern European, Western European, Russian Muslim point of view, with which Turkey is very much integrated, because Turkey is a country of refugees, just like Pakistan was, Circassians and Bosniaks and so on. So, and finally, yes, I think that was the final question. This division between secular and religious is not, because some people have criticized, and I didn't have time to address that in the article or in the talk, but in other talks I did. He said, when you have a country with so many internal divisions, how can it pursue a grand strategy? I completely reject this proposition, because France has been divided since the revolution. The Battle of Two Frances, it has followed a grand strategy. United States had very deep racial and other divisions until 1965, and it followed an extremely successful, aggressive grand strategy. Similar things we can say about, exclusion of Catholics and others from the very beginning of Anglican England. So having internal divisions, fight between Jacobins and religious, or, white and black, or Russia, or People's Republic of China, one of the most repressive totalitarian states in the world. Having internal divisions, disputes, problems does not prevent countries from following a successful grand strategy in their foreign policy. Of course, it would be, and it is much better as countries alleviate and solve those internal disputes, because it increases the latent economic and demographic power of the country. So having a Kurdish opening, having decriminalizing Islamic religious activity in the country increases Turkey's economic, demographic, and soft power. But having internal problems alone does not prevent a successful grand strategy from being pursued. Thank you very much for these thought-provoking questions and this wonderful discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Akturk. I think that the fact that we have went so long over time is a sign that we need you here more often, and that hopefully we can have more sessions like these in the future on many different micro aspects of your grander thesis. There seems to be a lot of material here that we need to work through. Obviously, a lot of this maybe is more solid in your mind, but as students of foreign policy, especially living here in Turkey and watching the region, I think it will be very important to break off pieces from what you have said and engage them more closely. I want to give my thanks to you and from the center, on behalf of the center, and I want to thank all of those people who have participated through their questions and who tune in to our webinars from all around the world. We try to keep our webinars at a certain hour so that we could have a global audience. But in any case, thank you for all your participation. Please keep your eyes open for our next webinar that will be coming up in a few weeks. And once again, thank you very much from Istanbul. Assalamu alaikum. Bye.